The wind rises slowly over the plain, stirring the silence of an ancient world. Grasses bend, whispering against one another like restless voices. Above, a pale sun begins its climb, weak and hazy through the mist of a new dawn. And there, across the open steppe, faint marks press into the earth, footprints. Some large and firm, others light and hesitant. Together, they form a line stretching endlessly toward a horizon that seems to swallow everything. This is not a modern migration, not a caravan, not the march of armies. It is a small tribe, scattered figures moving at different paces, bound together by kinship, hunger, and a shared will to keep walking. Their path is not written in maps or carved into stone. It is written only in the dust, in tracks that the wind will soon erase. For a moment, the image seems ordinary. People walking, families moving, but then something in the trail becomes troubling. One set of footprints is missing. At the rear, the ground shows only broken grass, disturbed earth, and then nothing. A gap where steps should continue. Someone has fallen away. Why would a tribe, bound by love, kinship, and the instinct to protect its own, leave one of their own behind? Why would they, in a world where survival depends not just on strength but on unity, decide to abandon the weakest among them? This is the haunting question that drifts like smoke through the corridors of prehistory. For every act of compassion we uncover, healed bones, cared for elders, disabled individuals carried for years, there is the shadow of the opposite. Times when the weight became too much. Times when the group kept moving, and someone was left behind to face the silence of the plain alone. The prologue begins not with certainty, but with paradox. We humans are creatures of empathy, shaped by bonds of care and tenderness. We cradle infants, we mourn the dead, we share food even when there is not enough. And yet, at the very same time, we are creatures of survival, sharpened by necessity, forced by nature's cruelty to make decisions that tear at the very fabric of what it means to be human. The footprints in the dust embody that paradox. They show movement and progress, but also absence and loss. They whisper of a story where life and death are decided not only by nature but by human hands, by choices so unbearable that those who made them may never have spoken of them again. Imagine the scene: a frail elder, their breath ragged, unable to walk another mile. The group has tried to support them for days, carrying their weight, sharing what little food they have. But the path grows longer, the predators circle nearer, and the children cry from hunger. Every extra pause, every burdened step increases the risk to everyone. At some point, in silence, or in tears, the tribe makes the choice. They lay the elder down, perhaps with a blanket of hide, perhaps with a final touch to the hand. And then they walk on. The elder watches them disappear into the horizon until the figures blend into the grass and the sky. The sound of footsteps fades. And in that fading silence, the elder is left with only the wind, the cold, and the long patience of the earth. It is unbearable to think about, yet it is a reality our ancestors must have faced. To survive in an unforgiving world, they sometimes had to do the thing we fear most: to abandon those we love. This prologue is not meant to give easy answers. Instead, it invites us to step into that moment, to feel the dust underfoot, the ache in tired muscles, the press of hunger, the weight of responsibility. It asks us to consider, not from a distance but as though we were there, what we would have done. Would we have stopped, risking the survival of children and kin? Or would we have walked on, leaving behind someone whose eyes we had known our whole lives? The story of leaving the weakest behind is not just a story of prehistory. It is, in many ways, the first story of human morality, the first ethical crisis, written not in words but in footsteps. Because in those silent choices, our ancestors were deciding what kind of creatures we would become. The earth remembers, even if the people did not speak of it. Archaeology gives us glimpses, remains of the sick and the frail, sometimes lovingly cared for, sometimes clearly abandoned. But the deeper truth is not written in bones. It lingers in the spaces between footprints, in the absences, in the silences. This is where our journey begins. With a haunting image, a trail across a windswept plain, one set of footprints ending before the others. It is not just a path of migration. It is a path of decisions, of burdens carried and burdens set down. It is the path that defines what it means to be human. As we follow these footprints, we will walk through landscapes of ice and fire, across savannas filled with predators, into caves where ancestors lit their fires against the night. We will see the weak, the frail, the injured, the old, and we will ask over and over, what did the tribe do? Did they carry them? Did they comfort them? Or did they turn away, hearts heavy, and keep walking? This prologue ends where the story begins, with a question, not an answer. Why would a tribe, bound by love and need, ever leave their weakest behind? Was it cruelty? Was it mercy? Or was it something more complicated? Something we can only glimpse through fragments of evidence and the echoes of our own humanity. The wind rises again, sweeping across the plain. The footprints begin to blur, vanishing into the dust. The tribe moves onward into the unknown. And the one who was left behind sits in silence, their presence erased, but their absence eternal. We step into that silence now. And from here, the story unfolds. The world of our ancestors was not the world we know today. To understand why a tribe might abandon its weakest, we must first step back tens of thousands of years, into an environment that shaped every decision, every breath, and every fragile heartbeat. It was a world both beautiful and merciless. Imagine vast open steppes stretching beyond sight, dotted with herds of bison, mammoth, and reindeer. Rivers cut silver lines across plains, carving out valleys where trees clung stubbornly to the soil. The air was sharp with the scent of grass and ice. Seasons shifted with brutal swings, summers short and unpredictable, winters long and devastating. This was not a stage set for comfort. It was a world where the line between life and death was measured not in years but in days, sometimes even hours. A sudden storm could strip the land bare. A failed hunt could mean starvation. A twisted ankle, something trivial in our world, could spell doom. The weak did not live in isolation. Their fragility rippled outward, pulling at the survival of all. The tribe that walked across this harsh land was small, rarely more than 20 to 30 individuals. Numbers mattered. Too few, and they were vulnerable to predators. Too many, and food could not be found in sufficient supply. Each member was both a resource and a responsibility. Every pair of hands could carry, gather, hunt, or defend. Every mouth required feeding. Balance was everything, and balance was fragile. Food dictated movement. The tribe followed the herds, shifting with the seasons, reading the landscape for signs, hoof prints pressed into wet soil, broken branches, the distant rumble of movement. They carried little with them, weapons of wood and stone, bundles of skins, perhaps a few precious objects of bone or shell. What they owned could be carried on their backs. What they could not carry, they left behind. Even objects. Even tools. If tools could be abandoned, what then of people? To modern eyes, it may feel unthinkable. But to the tribe, survival was a negotiation with the land. Every step carried weight. If one person faltered, others bore the burden. And when the land offered no mercy, when herds were scarce, when rivers ran dry, when predators followed too close, there was little room for sentiment. Predators defined the landscape as much as prey. Lions, wolves, and hyenas tracked the movements of humans, waiting for weakness, smelling exhaustion. A tribe slowed by illness or injury was a target. The weak did not just threaten their own survival, they threatened everyone's. The climate, too, was a constant adversary. Ice Age winters brought endless snow, searing winds, and weeks where the sun barely rose. To move through that world was to fight against death itself. Even the strong faltered in such conditions. For the weak, the elderly, the sick, the injured, it was almost unbearable. Every step demanded more strength than their bodies could give. And yet this world was not only hostile, it was alive with astonishing beauty. The skies stretched wider than anything we know, filled with stars so bright they painted the night in silver. Herds thundered across valleys like rivers of life. Fires burned against the cold, casting light on faces filled with laughter, tenderness, and story. It is in this paradox, the brutality of survival and the depth of human love, that the drama of abandonment lies. For this was not a world of cruelty without compassion. Evidence tells us that our ancestors cared deeply. Bones show healing after injury, teeth worn smooth but mouths fed long after chewing was possible. Compassion was as real as hunger. But compassion had limits. When the herd moved on and the tribe followed, there was no promise of return. When the land gave nothing, sharing food meant risking starvation together. When predators prowled too close, hesitation could kill. The world they inhabited gave no easy choices. And so, within it, humanity was shaped, not just physically, but morally. The environment forced questions upon them that echo even now. How much can we sacrifice for one? How much risk can we bear for love? Where do we draw the line between survival and compassion? To imagine their world is to stand at the edge of a camp, hearing the night wind rattle through grass, knowing that beyond the fire's glow, danger waits. It is to walk across a plain so vast it feels like the earth itself is endless, yet to know that every step could be your last. It is to carry a child in your arms, bones aching, breath ragged, while behind you the elderly stumble, and ahead the hunters signal that food is still days away. This was the world they inhabited. Not cruel for cruelty's sake, but indifferent. Nature did not bend to human will. Instead, it shaped human will, forging resilience and forcing choices that we now look back on with awe, horror, and deep reflection. The question of why a tribe left their weakest behind cannot be understood in isolation. It can only be understood here, in this world, where beauty and brutality existed side by side, where the land gave life and demanded sacrifice, where survival was never guaranteed. And so the footprints in the dust make sense. They belong to people who lived not in comfort but in constant negotiation with the earth itself. Each step was a gamble, each choice a calculation, each absence a wound the tribe carried silently as they walked on. This was the stage upon which humanity's earliest moral struggles were played. Not in temples, not in cities, not in courts of law, but in grasslands, forests, and ice. In camps huddled against storms. In fires that burned small against the vast night. It is here that our story continues. Among the rhythm of migration, where every footstep carried the weight of survival, there were always those whose steps faltered. The fragile, the elderly whose bones ached, the sick whose lungs rattled, the injured whose wounds slowed the group, and the children too frail to walk the long distances demanded by the land. These were the tribe's most vulnerable, and their presence created both the deepest bonds of compassion and the heaviest burdens of necessity. Picture an elder, their hair silver, eyes clouded but still sharp with memory. They remembered rivers long since dried, hunts long since past. Around the fire, their voice told stories that held the tribe together, binding generations with words. Yet on the open plain, with distance stretching into the horizon, that same elder could walk no faster than a slow shuffle. Every pause for their rest delayed the hunters, every lagging step stretched the distance between safety and risk. Or imagine the sick child, their chest rattling with infection, clinging to their mother's shoulders as she struggled to carry them. The child's weight slowed her, exhausted her, and forced her to consume more food to keep pace. But food was scarce. For every bite she gave her child, she took away from herself, and weakened her ability to feed the others who depended on her. Fragility was not isolated to the individual, it rippled outward into the entire tribe's survival. In these moments, compassion and calculation collided. To abandon the weak felt unthinkable. They were family, bound by love. But to carry them was also to risk starvation, exhaustion, or death for the group. Every mouth required food. Every burden consumed strength. And so, fragility became not just a personal struggle but a test of the tribe's endurance and its values. Anthropological evidence shows us both sides of this paradox. In some sites, we see healed fractures, bones that testify to years of survival despite severe injury, proof that others carried, fed, and protected them. Some skeletons show deformities that would have prevented individuals from hunting or gathering, yet they lived decades longer than expected. These were lives made possible only through the care of others. But there are also absences. Bodies left where they fell. Graves that tell stories not of long-term care but of sudden abandonment. Archaeology reminds us that fragility could not always be carried, no matter how strong the bonds of kinship. The burden was not only physical. It was emotional, spiritual, moral. To care for the fragile was to feel love, obligation, and empathy. To consider leaving them was to feel guilt, shame, and grief. These emotions were as real in prehistory as they are today. Though they left no written records, their choices, carved into the silence of the land, echoes that we can still sense. Fragility could even divide a tribe. Some would argue for care, insisting that abandoning an elder or child was unthinkable. Others would argue for survival, calculating that one life lost might save many. Around campfires, in hushed tones, these debates must have played out, voices rising with anguish, falling with resignation. In those moments, the tribe was forced to decide not only who would live, but what kind of people they were willing to be. The weak also carried symbolic weight. Elders were more than just slow walkers. They were knowledge bearers, memory keepers, the living archives of the tribe. To lose them was not only to ease the physical burden but to erase stories, songs, and wisdom that might never return. To abandon a sick child was not only to relieve a mother's burden but to cut off a future life, a potential hunter, gatherer, or storyteller. Fragility, therefore, was never just about weakness, it was about the tension between present survival and future possibility. We cannot romanticize their lives. To live in such a world was to constantly weigh impossible options. The burden of fragility was not a simple cruelty inflicted by a harsh people. It was a reality shaped by an environment that allowed little margin for error. Every tribe wanted to protect its own. Every tribe loved and mourned. But every tribe also knew the land would not forgive overburdening. And so the fragile walked at the edge of survival. Sometimes carried, sometimes cherished, sometimes quietly left behind. They were the test by which humanity was measured, whether love could outweigh necessity, or whether necessity would demand the ultimate sacrifice. In the end, the burden of fragility was not only theirs to carry, it was shared. Shared by the strong who bore their weight, shared by mothers who fed them, shared by hunters who risked hunger to sustain them. Every fragile life was a mirror held up to the tribe, reflecting both its compassion and its limits. And when the tribe failed, when the fragile were finally too heavy a burden, the silence that followed was not simply the silence of absence. It was the silence of a moral wound, one that no amount of survival could fully erase. This is the burden of fragility. It was not measured only in footsteps slowed or food divided. It was measured in hearts heavy with grief, in minds haunted by choices, in the echo of questions that had no answers. And it is here, in this burden, that we begin to see why a tribe might sometimes leave their weakest behind. If the day belonged to struggle, to walking and carrying, to hunting and enduring, then the night belonged to something else entirely. When the tribe gathered around the fire, the burdens of fragility and survival eased, if only for a few hours. For in the circle of flame, kinship revealed its full strength. Imagine the camp after a long day of movement. The tribe settles into a hollow, perhaps sheltered by boulders or the curve of a hill. The fire is coaxed from embers carried carefully in a pouch of bark and moss, sparks struck against flint until the wood catches. Slowly, flames rise, their light spilling out against the darkness. The transformation is instant. The cold is pushed back, predators hesitate at the glow, and faces, weary and lined by hunger, soften. The tribe becomes more than individuals scattered across the plain, they become one body, bound by warmth, light, and story. It is here that fragility shifts meaning. In the day, the weak were burdens. But by the fire, they were voices. The elder too frail to walk with speed becomes the storyteller, shaping the silence into myth. The sick child, coughing in their mother's arms, is comforted by the lull of song and laughter. Fire did not erase the hardships of the world, but it softened them, giving space for compassion to breathe. Anthropologists often describe fire as the hearth of humanity, not only for its practical uses, but for what it created between people. Around fire, time slowed. Food was shared, meat roasted, marrow cracked open and passed from hand to hand. Hands touched shoulders, parents soothed children, lovers leaned close. Even in prehistory, tenderness glowed in the firelight. Kinship was not an abstract idea. It was survival's other half. While strength carried the body through the day, kinship carried the spirit through the night. In the fire's warmth, the tribe reminded itself why it endured. Not just to live another day, but to live together. The fragile, who seemed so heavy on the trail, reminded the tribe of this truth. The elder's story tied the past to the present, keeping memory alive. The frail child embodied the hope of the future, their survival a reason to keep moving. In the flickering glow, the tribe could see itself not only as a collection of bodies but as a chain stretched across time. Every weak member was a link, every strong member a protector of that chain. Think of the power of a story told at fire. The elder's voice rises and falls, describing hunts of long ago, great storms endured, ancestors who became stars. Children lean forward, eyes wide, while adults listen with reverence, recognizing in those tales the meaning of their own suffering. A story could make hunger bearable, fear manageable, grief survivable. A story was as nourishing as marrow. Archaeological sites confirm this intimacy. Hearths, often central to camps, are found blackened with ash, encircled by stone. Sometimes the bones of animals lie cracked nearby, evidence of shared meals. Sometimes pigments are found, hinting at painted bodies or walls glowing in the light. Fire was the center, not only of warmth, but of belonging. And so, even as abandonment haunted the tribe by day, compassion revived by night. When the group held each other close, when voices rose in laughter or song, when silence was filled by nothing but the crackle of flame, it became unthinkable that anyone should be left behind. In those hours, kinship was everything. But the fire's warmth was temporary. When the embers cooled and dawn returned, the burdens re-emerged. Still, those nights mattered. They reminded the tribe of who they were, not simply survivors, but humans. Not simply bodies moving across land, but hearts bound together by love, memory, and hope. It is important to linger here, because without understanding this side of the human story, we risk imagining prehistory as only cold calculation, only the ruthless law of survival. That was never the full truth. For every time a tribe left a weak member behind, there were countless nights of carrying, of nursing, of comforting. Fire and kinship allowed humanity to endure more than any muscle or weapon could. Consider again the elder by the fire. Though their legs falter by day, at night their voice binds the tribe to its ancestors. In their wrinkles and stories, children see the passage of time. Consider the mother with her sick child. By day she suffers under the burden of carrying. By night, the fire gives her hope that tomorrow the child will breathe easier. In these small exchanges, the touch of a hand, the sharing of a scrap of food, the hush of voices singing, the tribe remembered why it endured at all. It was not only about survival. It was about connection, about belonging, about the fire that glowed inside them as much as the one that burned before them. The paradox is sharp. The same people who at dawn might make the unbearable choice to leave a weak member behind were, the night before, the ones who sang with them, laughed with them, shared food with them. Compassion and cruelty were not separate worlds. They existed side by side, flowing into one another like the dance of flame and shadow. Fire and kinship remind us of this complexity. Our ancestors were not cold-hearted pragmatists, nor were they saints of unbroken love. They were both, torn between what they felt and what the land demanded. Around the fire, they leaned toward love. On the trail, they leaned toward survival. This duality is what makes the story of abandonment so haunting. It was never easy. It was never without sorrow. It was never without the memory of nights when kinship felt eternal. To leave someone behind was to extinguish not only a life but a part of that circle around the fire. And yet, without fire and kinship, there would have been no humanity at all. It was here, in these circles of warmth and story, that we became who we are. The fragile were not only burdens, they were the very reason fire mattered. They gave shape to the tenderness that distinguished humanity from the indifferent world around it. As flames flickered and shadows danced on stone, the tribe saw itself reflected, not just as hunters or gatherers, but as kin, as people who carried both strength and fragility together, as people who would endure not only because they could hunt, but because they could love. In this light, we see why abandonment hurt so deeply. It was not only about leaving someone behind. It was about breaking the circle, dimming the fire, silencing a voice that once spoke in the glow of kinship. The story of fire is the story of humanity's heart. And it is here, around this fire, that we prepare to face the darkness of sacrifice that comes when survival demands too much. The fire burns down, dawn rises, and the tribe begins to move again. The warmth of kinship still lingers, but as the sun climbs, reality presses harder. Hunger gnaws. The land stretches wide and indifferent. The herds that sustain life are far ahead, and predators stalk the shadows behind. The fragile must keep pace, or the group must decide their fate. This is where survival demands sacrifice. Sacrifice is not a word used lightly. It is not only the loss of a body. It is the loss of connection, of memory, of laughter once shared around the fire. It is the tearing apart of bonds forged through years of struggle. But when survival stood in the balance, our ancestors were forced into choices so brutal that even today they echo like thunder in the imagination. Imagine this moment: a hunt has failed. The tribe chased reindeer across the plain, but the animals moved faster than expected. Spears fell short. The hunters return empty-handed. The stores of dried meat are nearly gone. Children cry through the night, their bellies cramping. Mothers have no milk left to give. In such a world, every additional mouth is a weight dragging the group closer to death. Or imagine a different moment. A storm breaks suddenly across the steppe, wind lashing like knives, snow blinding the eyes. The tribe struggles forward, cloaks of hide pulled tight, but the elder collapses in the drifts. To stop is to risk the entire group freezing. To carry them is impossible. Already mothers stagger under the weight of children. The choice is cruel, but it is clear. The tribe walks on. These were not decisions made with cold hearts. They were decisions made with trembling hands, with tears, with voices breaking. Sacrifice was never easy, never casual. It was the last resort, the bitter end of endurance. But in the merciless theater of survival, it was sometimes the only path left. Anthropology suggests such choices were rare, but they must have existed. We know of tribes that carried the injured for years, evidence written in healed bones. We know of compassion carved into prehistory, but we also know the land was unforgiving, that winters lasted too long, that predators followed too close. There must have been moments when the burden could no longer be borne. For the tribe, sacrifice was not only about losing one member. It was about saving the many. The strong had to walk. The children had to survive. The hunters had to keep their strength. To give up one was, in their eyes, to protect the future of all. It was a calculation so brutal it tears at us even now, but in their world, the equation was inescapable. And yet, even in sacrifice, there was ritual. A final meal shared, a blanket wrapped around the shoulders of the one left behind, a song whispered into the wind. These gestures softened the unbearable, giving meaning where none could be found. Sacrifice was framed not as abandonment, but as passage, into death, into memory, into the realm of ancestors. Still, the tribe carried the wound. To walk away from kin was to carry a silence heavier than any body. Around future fires, voices might lower when that name was spoken, or perhaps it was never spoken again. The sacrifice that saved the group also haunted it. Survival demanded these choices again and again, in countless variations. A mother forced to choose which child to carry. Hunters forced to abandon the wounded. Families forced to leave behind the sick when predators prowled too close. Every situation carried the same core, love colliding with necessity. The phrase, "the weakest," is too simple, too clinical. In reality, it was never weakness alone. It was circumstance. An elder might be cherished and carried for years until a single winter broke the tribe's strength. A child might survive sickness one season, only to be left the next when the group could give no more. Fragility was not static. It shifted with the seasons, with the land, with the hunger in every belly. And so sacrifice became not only an act, but a philosophy. To endure, the tribe had to see beyond the individual, to the survival of kin as a whole. Every step was a wager on the future. To save the young was to save tomorrow. To release the elder was to honor the past, even in loss. Yet the paradox deepened. Sometimes, those who were sacrificed could have survived. Sometimes, with one more day of carrying, one more handful of food, one more chance at fire, they might have lived. But the tribe could not know that. Their decisions were made in fog and uncertainty. And so sacrifice carried not only grief, but doubt. It is here, in this space between necessity and doubt, that humanity's first moral struggles arose. Was the choice right? Was it fair? Was it merciful? These questions lingered, though perhaps not in words as we know them. They lingered in silence, in the heaviness of the heart, in the way eyes turned away when the trail behind was empty. We must remember, sacrifice was never simply about survival. It was about identity. Every decision shaped what it meant to be human. Every choice between love and necessity carved deep lines into the soul of our species. To sacrifice was to survive, but at a cost that reshaped us forever. Picture the tribe walking on after such a moment. The wind blows across the plain, erasing the footprints of the one left behind. The group keeps moving, heads bowed, hearts heavy. They do not speak. The silence is thick. A silence that will follow them for miles, for years, for generations. In that silence lies the essence of sacrifice. The ones who survived carried the memory. They told stories around future fires, perhaps not of the sacrifice itself, but of the person lost, their laughter, their strength, their wisdom. In this way, sacrifice was not an erasure, but a transformation. The body was gone, but the presence lingered, woven into story, into myth, into the tribe's identity. And so we arrive at the heart of this section. Survival demands sacrifice, but sacrifice is never only loss. It is both wound and bond, both grief and continuity. It is the cruelest necessity and the deepest reminder of love. Because to feel the pain of sacrifice at all is to prove that love was there. For our ancestors, every step across the plains, every night by the fire, every choice at the edge of life and death was shaped by this truth. To live, they sometimes had to give up what they cherished most. And yet, in the act of giving up, they revealed what it meant to cherish. This is the paradox of humanity's earliest survival, that sacrifice and love were never opposites. They were intertwined, each giving the other its weight. And it is in this paradox that we begin to glimpse why a tribe, with hearts full of both compassion and desperation, might leave their weakest behind. The sun is low, casting long shadows across the open plain. The tribe walks together, each step carrying them toward a future unknown. But at the back of the line, one figure moves more slowly, an elder. Their pace falters. Their breath comes heavy. Every stride is a battle. There is a rhythm to the tribe's movement, a collective pulse, yet the elder cannot match it. Their legs ache with age, their bones stiff from years of carrying burdens, hunting, and surviving. Once, they were strong, the one who taught the young how to set traps, the one who told stories that stitched the tribe's past into memory. But now, time has weighed upon them. Their walk is slower, their pause is longer, their endurance fragile. This image, the elder falling behind, is one of the oldest and most human. It is both ordinary and profound. Every generation has known it. Every band of humans, across every landscape, has faced the reality that age slows the body even as it enriches the spirit. For the tribe, this was no simple problem. Elders carried knowledge, where water could be found in a drought, which plants healed sickness, which caves offered safety from storms. They carried memory, a living archive of survival written not on stone or bone, but in story. To lose them too soon was to risk the tribe's wisdom collapsing into silence. And so, whenever possible, tribes kept their elders close, carrying them when they could, slowing the group's pace to allow them time. But sometimes, the land gave no mercy. When herds moved fast, when storms gathered on the horizon, when hunger pressed like iron into the gut, the tribe faced an impossible balance, to protect knowledge, or to protect the future. And so the slow walk of the elder became a kind of symbol. Each faltering step was a reminder of mortality, of the limits of flesh, of the relentless march of time. Every child who watched their grandparents stumble learned not only about fragility, but about love, patience, and the brutal decision survival could demand. Picture this moment: the tribe stops to rest, but the elder takes longer to sit, lowering themselves to the ground with effort. The young bring water, tilting a skin to their lips. The elder drinks, grateful, then speaks softly, telling a story of when they were young, when the rivers were swollen with fish and the winters less cruel. The children listen wide-eyed. The adults pause their worries, if only for a breath, carried back into a memory they never lived but still belong to. This is the gift of the elder, the ability to stretch the present into something larger, something rooted. But when the group rises again, the elder lags behind. Their voice may be strong, but their body betrays them. And the tribe must choose, to wait, to carry, or to move on. Archaeology gives us glimpses of how often patience won. In burials, we find bones of elders healed after injury, signs they were cared for long after usefulness to the hunt had passed. We find jaws with missing teeth, yet smoothed bones showing the person lived years without the ability to chew, which means others must have softened food for them. These are signs of tenderness, of kinship, of loyalty even when survival was harsh. But tenderness had limits. The harshest winters, the hungriest migrations, the longest chases sometimes broke even the strongest bonds. The elder's slow walk might become more than the tribe could bear. And when that moment arrived, it often came quietly. An elder might know it themselves. They might stop on the path, sitting on a stone, saying, "Go. I will rest here." They might insist the tribe move on, not out of fear, but out of love. To be the one who slows the group is, in such moments, to threaten the survival of children. And many elders, knowing this, may have chosen sacrifice themselves. Others may not have chosen. The tribe may have been forced, with breaking hearts, to leave them behind. The sound of footsteps fading would then be the elder's last memory of kin. The slow walk of the elder, then, is not only a physical image. It is a spiritual one. It carries the weight of love, memory, and inevitability. To walk slowly is to remind the tribe of what was, and of what must come. And even when left behind, the elders' presence lingered. Their stories remained in the mouths of children. Their lessons lived on in the way traps were set, in the way fires were kindled, in the way prayers were spoken to the sky. In this way, the elder never fully vanished. Their slow walk carried forward into the steps of others. There is something hauntingly beautiful in this duality. The slow walk is sorrowful, yes, it speaks of frailty, of endings, but it is also luminous. It reminds us that humanity is not measured only by speed or strength, but by memory and meaning. Even when survival forced hard choices, even when elders were left to rest alone beneath the open sky, their legacy endured in every breath of the living. And so, across the prehistoric plain, the image of the elder walking slowly becomes more than history. It becomes a mirror. Because even today, in our own families, we know this walk. We know the patience it demands, the love it calls forth, and the grief it eventually brings. The tribe of long ago is gone, but their struggles are not alien. Their dilemmas live on in us, echoing through time. Every slow step of the elder is a step we too will take, or a step we will one day watch with reverence and sorrow. In this, we see the deepest truth. The slow walk of the elder is not the weakness of humanity. It is humanity itself. The plains are wide, but the wind is wider. It sweeps across the land with a chill that bites into skin, a reminder that nature's hand is neither gentle nor cruel, it is indifferent. The tribe pulls its furs tighter, but for the smallest among them, the children, the cold cuts deeper. Children of the Ice Age were born into a world that asked much of them before they could give much back. Their cries pierced the air, fragile sounds in a landscape dominated by silence and the groaning of storms. Their steps were unsteady, their lungs delicate, their warmth easily stolen by a night wind that slipped beneath hides and fires. To keep a child alive was not only an act of care, it was an act of defiance against a world that seemed always ready to take them back. Archaeology tells us what bones cannot hide. Infant mortality was staggering. For every child who lived to see the sun rise beyond their 10th winter, many did not. Small graves, carefully dug, remind us that love existed even in tragedy. Some are buried with beads, with tiny ornaments, with signs of tenderness. The tribe mourned its young not with detachment but with reverence. Each loss was a wound in the collective heart. And yet, children were also the tribe's brightest light. Around the fire, they laughed, played, imitated the hunter's throws or the gatherer's digging. They were the promise of continuity, the fragile future of bloodlines, of songs, of memory. Every effort to keep them alive was not just about survival, it was about hope. Imagine a winter march. Snow crunches underfoot. Adults lean into the wind, faces hardened, but the children stumble, small legs dragging, cheeks raw from frost. A mother or father lifts one, carrying them against the chest, trying to shield them from the air with their own body heat. Another adult takes turns carrying yet another. The tribe slows. The pace falters. Every mile becomes 2. Every decision sharpens into a cruel question. Move quickly and risk the children freezing, or move slowly and risk the tribe starving before reaching safety. This was the dilemma of the cold wind. Children, in their vulnerability, shaped the path the tribe could take. They demanded patience from a world that allowed none. And for that reason, they often became the silent measure of choice. Not all children could be saved. It is a truth both unbearable and real. In the hardest winters, when food was scarce and fires small, when the cold crept into marrow, the weakest child might not survive the night. Some tribes may have made choices we can scarcely imagine, to leave behind the sickly, the frail, the newborn too small to endure. We do not know how often this happened, but hints in bones, in burial patterns, suggest it was not rare. And yet, love was never absent. Even when choices were brutal, it was not indifference but desperation that drove them. Parents would have tried everything first, wrapping the child in extra furs, feeding them what little fat remained, singing them through the night, warming them against skin. Only when all was exhausted, when the balance of survival tipped against the group, would unthinkable choices appear. But many times, the children endured. Their laughter in the morning, after a storm that threatened to silence them, was a kind of miracle. The tribe drew strength from that sound. To hear a child's voice after the long night was to be reminded why they fought at all. The children were not merely passive dependents. From the youngest years, they learned through watching. A boy might mimic the motion of throwing a spear with a stick, his stance wide, his arm sharp. A girl might weave grasses into small bundles, copying the way her mother tied furs. Knowledge passed not only in lessons but in games. Childhood was preparation, the playful rehearsal for the tasks that one day would mean life or death. Around the fire, they asked questions. Why is the sky angry? Where does the mammoth go when it dies? Why does the wind sing in the caves? Their questions were not only curiosity, they were the roots of myth, of story, of philosophy. Adults answered not just with facts, but with tales. In this way, children were the keepers of wonder, forcing the tribe to give shape to the mysteries of the world. But still, the wind returned. Always the wind. It carried sickness. It carried cold. It carried silence when children's voices faded. And each time, the tribe was forced again into reflection. What does it mean to protect the weakest? How much can we bear for them? How much can we sacrifice for them? The children of the cold wind remind us of something profound. Vulnerability shapes humanity. It is because children were fragile that cooperation became essential. It is because children slowed the tribe that compassion became a necessity. Without them, perhaps humanity would have become colder, sharper, less bound to one another. But because children existed, because they demanded care, the tribe learned to carry more than itself. Even in the archaeological record, we see this truth. Graves of infants show adornments, shells, beads, ochre, items the child could not use in life, but gifts of honor in death. These were offerings of love, symbols that the short life mattered. They tell us that even when survival required harshness, hearts were not hardened. Sorrow was real, mourning was deep. There is, too, a philosophical echo here. Every child lost was a reminder that life itself was fragile. The tribe could not escape this truth. and so they built meaning around it. Myths of rebirth, of spirits carried by the wind, of ancestors walking beside them, all of these may have roots in the sorrow of children lost too soon. In their absence, stories grew. In their silence, rituals were born. The children of the cold wind are not only prehistoric. They live in memory, in myth, in us. Even now, we understand the instinct to protect the fragile, to warm the smallest hands against our own. It is not simply survival. It is love, written into the marrow of our species. And so, in the great march of the tribe, the children's voices, whether laughing or silenced, shaped the rhythm of humanity's journey. They forced choices that cut deep. They gave meaning to sacrifices. They were, in their weakness, the very reason humanity learned strength. The cold wind took many, but the ones who survived carried forward more than bloodlines. They carried forward the truth that no tribe could endure without love. The night is quiet, but it is not peace. A fire flickers low, its light dancing on faces carved by exhaustion. In the shadows, mothers hold their children close, listening to each breath as if it might be the last. Fathers sit nearby, hands resting on spears, eyes distant, carrying a weight heavier than hunger. The tribe has reached the moment every human dreads, the moment when choice feels like betrayal. Parenthood in the Ice Age was both blessing and torment. To bring life into such a world was an act of defiance, a gamble against odds so steep that loss was expected as often as survival. Yet no parent could love less because of that. Mothers felt the bond in their very bodies, having carried the child through danger and cold, feeding them with their own strength. Fathers, though they could not give life in the same way, often gave protection with a ferocity that bordered on desperation. Both roles were bound in sacrifice. Both bore the unbearable. And yet, sometimes, the world demanded decisions that no heart was built to make. Food might run low. A storm might pin the tribe in place, stretching their strength to the breaking point. In those moments, parents were forced to confront the cruelest question: could all survive, or would some have to be left behind? Archaeology cannot tell us the exact words exchanged in these darkest nights, but we can imagine the silence. A mother rocking her child, feeling the fever burning through their skin. A father staring into the fire, knowing the journey ahead would break the sick child's body. Whispers between them, broken words, tears caught before they fell. The tribe waiting, no one wanting to speak the thought aloud. What happens when love collides with survival? History has left faint echoes of these choices. Ethnographic records from later hunter-gatherers tell of mothers walking for days with weak children in their arms, refusing to let them go until their own bodies collapsed. Others speak of tribes forced, with trembling hands, to leave a child in a sheltered hollow, placing beads or a small fur beside them, whispering prayers into the wind. We cannot know how often this happened in the deep past, but the logic of survival tells us it must have. Yet these choices were never made in cruelty. They were not abandonment born of indifference, but of anguish. Parents would have tried everything first, wrapping the child in extra hides, giving them their own share of meat, begging the spirits for healing. Only when the path narrowed to a razor's edge, when one life threatened to pull the rest into the grave, did the unthinkable appear. For the mother, this choice tore the soul apart. She was the closest tether between child and life, the one who had sheltered them within her body, who had given of her blood to sustain them. To let go was not just to lose, it was to sever a part of herself. For the father, the weight was different but no less heavy. His role was to defend, to carry, to endure. To admit that he could not save, that his arms were not strong enough to shield his child from the world, was a wound to his very being. And yet, parents also knew the other side of the truth. A child too weak to survive might endanger the rest. To carry them slowed the march. To feed them drained supplies. In the harsh arithmetic of survival, one life might mean the loss of many. This was the unbearable paradox. To save the tribe, sometimes a parent had to let go of the one they loved most. We must not imagine that these decisions were cold calculations. They were not done with steady hands but trembling ones. They were accompanied by weeping, by rituals, by prayers whispered into the night. Some parents may never have forgiven themselves. Some tribes may have carried the scars for generations. But alongside sorrow, there was resilience. The love that drove parents to impossible choices was the same love that drove them to endure. A child lost was not forgotten. Memory was woven into story. A mother might sing the same lullaby to the next child, carrying forward the echo of the one who did not survive. A father might carve marks into wood or stone, leaving behind a record that someone had lived, if only briefly. There is a deeper truth here, one that speaks to humanity itself. The burden of parental choice forged empathy. To face such agony was to recognize the depth of what it meant to love, to be bound not just by survival but by devotion. It created a legacy of care that still shapes us today. Even now, in the modern world, far from the fires of the Ice Age, the shadow of those decisions lingers. We still tell stories of parents sacrificing for their children, of mothers who give everything, of fathers who stand between danger and their family. These archetypes are not inventions of recent times. They are echoes of an ancient truth, carved into us when the stakes were highest and the world least forgiving. The mothers and fathers of the past were not so different from us. Their tears were the same. Their hopes were the same. Their love, perhaps even stronger, because it had to fight against the cold, the hunger, the constant threat of loss. To them, every child was both a miracle and a risk, a gift and a gamble. And when the time came to choose, they bore a burden that can still break our hearts when we imagine it. The fire burns low. The mother rocks her child one last time. The father looks away, his jaw clenched, his chest tight with grief. Outside, the wind howls. The tribe must move at dawn. And with it comes the weight of choice, one that will echo through their lives forever. The burden of mothers and fathers in the Ice Age was not only to bring life into the world, but to decide, sometimes, when that life could no longer walk beside them. It is the most human of tragedies, and the most human of truths. The word weakness is deceptive. In the Ice Age, weakness often meant a body too frail to endure the march, an illness that lingered, or an age that slowed the step. But weakness of body did not always mean weakness of mind, nor of spirit. Among those who could not carry heavy loads or run the longest miles were often the ones who carried something else, something invisible yet vital. Wisdom. Every tribe depended not only on hunters with strong arms or gatherers with quick eyes, but also on those who remembered, those who spoke, those who dreamed. An elder whose knees bent stiffly, who lagged behind the group, might yet hold in memory the location of a spring hidden in the hills, or the way stars aligned with safe passage. A child too fragile to keep up on the hunt might notice patterns in the world that others overlooked, the change of bird songs before a storm, the way a plant bent toward hidden water. The weak, in their seeming fragility, often offered insight. And insight could mean survival. In many hunter-gatherer cultures studied in recent times, elders serve as walking libraries, preserving stories, songs, and skills that no one else remembers. Imagine this in prehistory, where nothing was written, where every scrap of knowledge lived only in memory. To lose an elder was sometimes to lose entire worlds. The knowledge of how to knap a stone a certain way, the memory of a cave where game once gathered, the prayer that soothed fear on long nights. Weakness in the body could mask strength in the mind, a strength irreplaceable when famine or danger pressed close. But wisdom was not only memory, it was also perspective. Those who could not join every hunt, who spent more hours by the fire, had time to watch, to reflect, to connect patterns others missed. The frail child who listened more than they spoke might grow into the storyteller, weaving meaning from events, turning survival into narrative. These stories bound the tribe together, teaching children values, warning them of dangers, inspiring them with hope. In this sense, the so-called weak were not a burden, they were the keepers of the tribe's soul. Still, the tribe faced dilemmas. When the march grew hard, when every hand was needed to carry loads and every step meant life or death, those who could not contribute physically seemed like liabilities. And yet, the paradox was that those same individuals might be the ones who gave the tribe its resilience over the long arc of time. Strength without wisdom could win a battle. Wisdom without strength could guide a people for generations. Picture an elder leaning on a stick, their voice cracked with age, telling the young hunters of the migration of mammoths, of where rivers once froze thick enough to cross, of where herds gathered when the grass turned yellow. That knowledge could save lives. Picture a frail child left by the fire while others hunted, noticing how certain roots boiled longer gave more nourishment, or how certain leaves eased fever. Their discovery could shape survival for all. Weakness also brought empathy. When a tribe cared for those who could not always contribute, it strengthened bonds of compassion. The act of feeding a fragile elder, of carrying a sick child, taught everyone that survival was not only about the individual but about the group. This empathy created resilience. In times of crisis, the tribe that cared for its weakest often cared for one another more deeply, creating unity that carried them through storms and famines. But empathy had limits when hunger gnawed and ice storms raged. The tribe stood on a knife's edge, keep the weak and risk collapse, or leave them and risk losing wisdom, memory, and spirit. The choice was not always clear. Some tribes may have decided differently at different times, depending on the world pressing against them. Archaeological hints suggest that care was often given even when costly. Burials reveal elders who lived long past their usefulness as hunters, their bones frail but cared for. Graves hold children buried with beads and ochre, signs that they were honored, remembered, loved. These traces whisper that the weak were not always left behind. Many were cherished, their wisdom and presence valued beyond the cold measures of survival. And even when the tribe did make the cruelest decision, to leave someone behind, it is likely that they carried guilt and memory. A weak elder left to the snow was not forgotten. Their stories would live on, told in fireside whispers, their name carried on the breath of grandchildren. Weakness did not end with absence. It lingered as wisdom carried forward in memory. This duality, weakness as burden and weakness as wisdom, shaped the very heart of humanity. It forced tribes to ask, what do we value most? The immediate survival of the strong, or the long arc of knowledge and spirit carried by the frail? Every decision etched this question deeper into the human story. The truth is, weakness shaped us as much as strength did. Without the weak, there would be no memory. Without the frail, no empathy. Without the elders, no maps of the stars, no stories to explain the world, no continuity of culture across generations. The weak carried something no less vital than food or fire. They carried the wisdom of being human. And so, when we ask why a tribe might leave their weakest behind, we must also ask why so often they did not. Why, against the cold logic of survival, they chose to carry the elder one more day, to feed the sick child one more meal, to give the frail one more chance. It was not only because they loved them, though they surely did. It was because in their weakness lay something the tribe could not afford to lose, the memory of the past, the insight of the present, the spirit of endurance. The weak taught the strong what it meant to be human. They reminded the tribe that survival was not only about strength of arm, but also about strength of heart and mind. In their fragility lay a kind of power, a quiet, enduring wisdom that carried tribes not just across landscapes, but across generations. Night fire. A circle of faces, half hidden in shadow, half illuminated by dancing flame. Around the glow, a tribe gathers after the day's march. The cold presses close, stars hang like distant fires in the sky, and the air is thick not only with smoke but with tension. It is here, in the hush of night, that debates unfold, the kind that decide life, death, and the fate of those too weak to keep pace. The fire was more than warmth. It was counsel, memory, and judgment. Flames had a way of softening silence, of loosening tongues. Words spoken in its glow carried weight because they were not only heard by the tribe, but also witnessed by ancestors, by spirits, by the vast dark beyond. And in this light, the tribe did what humans have always done. They argued, they reasoned, they disagreed, they sought a way forward. Picture them, hunters with shoulders still aching from carrying heavy game, gatherers with baskets empty from a day of searching, mothers and fathers clutching children against the cold, elders leaning close to the fire, their lined faces flickering with orange light. And somewhere in the shadows, the weakest, the old, the sick, the injured, listened, perhaps knowing the debate was about them. The words were not casual. They were not spoken lightly. For to speak of leaving someone behind was to speak of ending a life. Some voices, urgent with hunger, might say, we cannot carry them further. Our food is thin. Every step grows harder. If we slow, all of us may die. Others, trembling with loyalty or grief, might reply, they have given to us all their lives. They fed us, taught us, protected us. How can we turn away now? The firelight revealed every emotion, anger, sorrow, guilt, fear. Each spark seemed to carry the weight of choice upward into the night. Such debates were not unlike those we still hold today, though the stakes were starker. Modern councils argue in parliaments and courts, weighing lives in different ways. But here, the council was primal. Survival pressed close, and compassion pressed closer. Both sides had power. Both sides had truth. Those who argued for leaving the weak behind were not heartless. They were realists, shaped by a world that punished hesitation. They had seen hunts fail because the group moved too slowly. They had buried children when food stretched too thin. For them, hard logic was mercy in another form, the mercy of protecting the many. Those who argued for carrying the weak were not naive. They knew the burden. They had felt the drag of slowing steps, the ache in the back, the gnawing hunger when too many mouths demanded too little food. Yet they also remembered the stories, the debts owed, the wisdom carried by those now fragile. For them, mercy was not in leaving, but in holding on, if only for one more day. Back and forth, the voices rose and fell. The fire popped and cracked, echoing the tension. Children might have fallen asleep against their mother's arms, but even in sleep they absorbed the gravity of the moment. The tribe was not only deciding who lived and who died, they were shaping what it meant to be them. Every decision at the fire was more than practical. It was cultural. It set precedent. If the tribe abandoned the weak too easily, compassion might wither, trust might erode. If they clung too tightly to every life, the burden might break them all. Between these extremes lay the narrow path of survival, the path they tried to find in firelight debate. Some nights, the debate may have ended with resolve: we carry them further. Tomorrow we find food. Tomorrow we survive together. Other nights, it may have ended in silence, with tears, with the painful consensus that one could go no further. We may never know the exact words spoken in those councils, but we know the pattern. For anthropologists have seen such debates in recent hunter-gatherer groups. Decisions were not made by decree but by consensus, by the rhythm of voices rising and falling until a path forward was felt. Around the fire, democracy flickered in its oldest form, not with votes, not with written laws, but with words, feelings, and the heavy weight of shared survival. And beyond the practical, these councils were moral crucibles. They forced people to ask, what is the value of a life? Do we measure it in strength, in food carried, in steps taken? Or do we measure it in love, in memory, in the unseen ties that bind us together? The firelight held these questions in silence long after the debates ended. Even when a decision was reached, embers glowed with unspoken doubts. A hunter who argued for leaving the weak might later feel a sting of guilt as he looked at the one left behind. A mother who begged for mercy might later curse herself when her own child went hungry. In the firelight, no decision was ever clean. But perhaps this is why fire became sacred. It was not only warmth against the cold, nor only a tool to cook food. It was the place where humanity wrestled with itself, where reason and compassion collided, where survival and morality were weighed against one another. Every flame mirrored the burning conflict in the human heart. We often imagine prehistoric life as simple: hunt, eat, survive. But the firelight of debate reveals otherwise. It was complex, heavy with choices that echo into our own time. For what are we if not still gathered around our own fires, screens, parliaments, courts, still debating who to help, who to leave behind, who to carry one step further? The tribe's debates, flickering in ancient firelight, were not only about survival in the Ice Age. They were the first sparks of philosophy, of ethics, of humanity learning to define itself. Each council shaped the tribe not just for the night, but for generations. Children who watched learned what their people valued. Elders who listened heard how their lives would be judged. The weak, who were debated over, carried in their hearts the knowledge that even frailty could stir the deepest questions of what it meant to belong. In the end, the firelight of debate was not just about the weak, it was about all of them. It was about how a tribe chose to be human in a world that constantly tested the limits of both strength and compassion. There comes a moment when debate ends. Words fade. The fire burns low, reduced to embers, and the tribe, weary from the weight of argument, must rise to action. It is in this moment that the hardest part begins, not the reasoning, not the weighing of choices, but the act itself. For nothing is heavier than a decision carried out in silence. The morning after a decision to leave someone behind begins like no other. The air feels colder. Every sound seems sharper: the crunch of frost underfoot, the whisper of wind through brittle grass, the faint crackle of dying firewood. The tribe moves slowly, not only from exhaustion but from the burden of knowing what must be done. Children sense the heaviness, though they may not understand it fully. Adults avert their eyes from the one who will stay. No words are spoken, yet everything is understood. The person left behind is not a stranger. They never are. They are someone's parent, someone's sibling, someone's companion in countless hunts or long walks across dangerous ground. They may be a grandmother who once sang lullabies to half the tribe, or a hunter whose scars tell stories of bravery. They may be the one who taught the young to track animals or find roots hidden under snow. Their presence is woven into the lives of those around them. And yet, the tribe must continue on without them. It is rarely a dramatic scene. Movies might imagine screaming, pleading, clinging hands. But reality for prehistoric people was quieter. Noise would only make it harder. Farewells were silent because words would break everyone. Silence was the only shield against shattering grief. The weak one, too, understood. Often they had already prepared themselves. They had seen the strain in others' faces, felt the slowing pace of their steps, heard the whispers around the fire. Many chose to say little, perhaps nodding in quiet acceptance. In their eyes there might be sorrow, but also resignation, the recognition that their departure would give the others a chance to live. Imagine the scene as the tribe begins to gather their few belongings. The one left behind sits still, wrapped in whatever furs they have, watching. They might offer a faint smile or avoid looking at the others altogether. They might touch a child's cheek one last time or murmur a blessing under their breath. A hand lingers on theirs longer than necessary before pulling away. No one says goodbye, yet every gesture is filled with finality. The silence is heavy, almost unbearable. No one wants to break it, for words would open a flood that could drown them all. And so they move quietly. The tribe shifts its weight, slings bags across shoulders, and begins the slow march forward. Behind them, the weak one remains, alone, but not entirely forsaken. For even in leaving, the tribe does not strip them of dignity. Perhaps they leave a share of food, a burning branch for fire, a skin of water, a gesture that says, "We cannot take you, but we will not abandon you to nothing." This is mercy in its final form. As the first steps are taken, the silence deepens. No one looks back at first. Looking back feels like betrayal, feels like salt in a wound that cannot heal. But eventually someone, often a child, turns their head. A last glimpse of the one sitting still, growing smaller with every step, etched forever in memory. That image will return in dreams, in stories, in moments of guilt and longing. The person left behind watches, too. They see the tribe grow distant, figures shrinking against the endless land. For a while, they may hope, perhaps the others will change their minds, perhaps someone will run back. But hope fades as the distance grows. Soon they are left only with the wind, the sky, and the fading tracks of their people. And in that stillness, something profound lingers. The silent farewell is not merely a tragedy. It is also an expression of humanity's deepest paradox. We are bound to one another, yet sometimes survival forces us apart. The pain of leaving is proof of love, proof that bonds were real. If there were no love, no grief, the leaving would not wound so deeply. Anthropologists believe these moments carried unspoken rituals. Some tribes may have whispered prayers as they walked away, asking spirits to guide the one left behind. Others may have promised themselves to remember them in stories so their voice would not vanish entirely. Farewells might not be spoken aloud, but they were carried inward, turned into silent vows. For those who left, the silence did not end with distance. Days later, around the next fire, they would still feel the empty space where that person once sat. The songs might sound thinner, the laughter less full. Even in survival, absence echoed. For those left behind, the silence became everything. Alone, their world shrank. The crackle of their own fire replaced the voices of many. The rustle of wind replaced children's laughter. Some may have lasted days, clinging to scraps of food, watching the horizon. Others may have succumbed quickly to cold, hunger, or predators. Yet in those last moments, they were more than weakness. They were the bearers of sacrifice, the ones whose stillness gave motion to the tribe. The silent farewell teaches us that prehistoric life was not only brutal, but deeply human. The pain of leaving behind the weak was not indifference, it was anguish wrapped in silence. Silence was the only way they could endure it. And in a way, silence still surrounds us when we face loss. Funerals often begin with quiet. Grief often leaves us wordless. In our own way, we still practice the silent farewell, because sometimes words cannot capture the depth of parting. The tribe moving forward carried more than their belongings. They carried the silence itself, a silence that weighed as heavily as hunger, that pressed against every heart with invisible force. But they also carried memory. They knew that the one left behind was not truly gone, not yet. They lived on in story, in teaching, in the way the tribe remembered their kindness, their strength, their laughter. Farewell was never absolute. And so, the silent farewell was not just about ending. It was about continuation. It was about how life went on, even when it broke the heart. If you want to glimpse the soul of a tribe, you do not look to its strongest hunters, nor to its wisest elders. You look into the eyes of its children. Their gazes reflect not only what they see in the moment but what will shape the world they carry forward. And when a child witnesses the leaving behind of one too weak to continue, something permanent etches itself into their memory, a quiet mark as enduring as stone carvings on cave walls. Children do not always understand the reasons. To them, the world is immediate, the warmth of a fire, the taste of food, the safety of a mother's arm. They see the old woman who once told them stories now sitting apart, left with only a fur to keep her warm. They see the man with shaking legs no longer walking with the group, instead watching as others move away. And they ask, silently or aloud, why? Why are we leaving them? The answers they receive are rarely direct. In prehistoric life, explanations were not always spoken in full sentences but shown in action, a glance between parents, a hand placed firmly on a child's shoulder urging them forward, a whispered phrase like, "We must go." These fragments of explanation are enough for the child to know that something larger than them is happening, something they may not yet be able to name but will never forget. It is in children that the echo of the silent farewell resounds the loudest. They remember not only the act but the atmosphere, the way the adults avoided looking back, the way the air seemed heavier, the way their mother's eyes glistened though no tears fell. To a child, such impressions are not abstract, they are visceral, burned into the fabric of their developing mind. And here lies a paradox of human evolution. Children were the most vulnerable, the most dependent, and yet they were also the keepers of memory. They absorbed everything, storing it like seeds waiting to sprout. The choices made by the tribe in one generation would echo through the children, shaping the ethics, fears, and resilience of the next. Imagine the child who, years later, grows into a hunter. The memory of leaving behind their grandmother lingers. Perhaps it makes them harsher, quicker to decide when someone is slowing the group. Or perhaps it makes them softer, hesitant, haunted by the look in their grandmother's eyes as she watched the tribe walk away. Either way, the past travels with them, carried silently from one age to the next. Children, more than anyone, feel the conflict between love and necessity. They love without calculation, without weighing resources or survival probabilities. To them, the old woman who gave them stories is priceless, not expendable. The man who once lifted them on his shoulders is a hero, not a burden. When survival forces the tribe to part with those figures, children feel the rawest wound. For them, it is not only survival, it is betrayal of the pure bonds they hold dearest. This is why anthropologists suggest many prehistoric cultures wrapped such moments in ritual or story. To a child, simply saying "we must leave" was not enough. They needed meaning. They needed to believe that the one left behind was not simply abandoned, but was journeying into another realm, joining spirits or watching over them in some invisible way. Myth was not just entertainment. It was medicine for the child's soul. Picture a mother whispering into her child's ear as they walk away from the weak one, "Do not fear. She will become a star in the sky, watching us at night." Or an elder telling the young, "He goes to join the ancestors, and he will guide our steps." Such words softened the unbearable. They transformed raw loss into continuity, weaving it into the spiritual fabric of the tribe. But still, the echo lingered. In the silence of night, children remembered the face of the one left behind. They remembered the way the firelight flickered on their frail figure. They remembered the pause before the first step away. And these memories returned again and again, in dreams, in play, in questions they dared to ask around the fire. For the tribe, this echo was not merely sentimental. It was essential, because it was through the children that morality evolved. Each generation carried forward not only the skills of hunting and toolmaking but the emotional weight of survival decisions. By observing their elders, by witnessing moments of sacrifice and departure, children internalized what it meant to belong, what it meant to endure, and what it meant to suffer loss. For the sake of life, some echoes hardened them. They grew into adults who valued endurance above all else, who believed that weakness was a threat to the tribe. These were the ones who, when faced with the same decision years later, would not hesitate. Others carried softer echoes, feeling the sting of abandonment so deeply that they vowed never to let it happen again. Perhaps these were the seeds of compassion that, in time, led humans toward greater cooperation and care for the frail. In this way, the gaze of a child was not passive. It was transformative. Their witnessing of the silent farewell shaped the trajectory of human society itself. Through their eyes, grief turned into culture, loss turned into ritual, and necessity turned into morality. Even today, echoes of this process remain. Modern children, when they first encounter death, carry the memory for life. The first funeral they attend, the first time they see a loved one's empty chair, becomes part of their worldview. The prehistoric child by the fire, watching their tribe leave someone behind, experienced the same formative wound. That wound, over thousands of generations, taught humanity how to live with the unbearable. The children's eyes did more than reflect sorrow, they also reflected resilience. For even as they carried the weight of loss, they learned from it. They saw that the tribe did not collapse. They saw that life went on, that fires were still lit, that hunts still succeeded. They learned that grief could coexist with survival. And in that lesson lay the secret of endurance. The silent farewell, then, was not only about those who stayed behind. It was about those who carried the memory forward. And no one carried it more deeply than the children. Their eyes absorbed the truth, their hearts bore the ache, and their voices, when they grew, wove the stories that explained it. And so, through children, the echo of a single farewell became immortal. The weak one left by the fire may have perished in the cold, but they lived on, in memory, in story, in the eyes of those who watched them fade into distance. In this way, even abandonment was transformed into a kind of continuity. The children remembered, and by remembering, they ensured that no one was ever truly forgotten. At the heart of human history lies a paradox. We are creatures of compassion, yet also creatures of survival. We are capable of nurturing the weak, feeding the sick, and protecting the fragile, but when pressed by hunger, cold, or danger, we can also choose to let go of those same lives. The philosophy of sacrifice was not something written in books, nor spoken in formal teachings. It was lived, embodied in choices that determined whether the group endured or perished. When a tribe left behind its weakest, the act was more than an act of necessity. It was a statement about values, priorities, and the delicate balance between individual worth and collective survival. To modern minds, sacrifice is often framed as noble, as heroic. But in the prehistoric world, it was rarely so clean. Sacrifice was sometimes noble, sometimes tragic, sometimes reluctant, and sometimes coldly practical. The philosophy behind it was not shaped by ideals but by the raw, unyielding demands of life itself. Consider the weight of choice. To carry the weak meant slowing the group, risking starvation, risking being overtaken by predators or rival tribes. To leave the weak meant preserving strength, ensuring the healthy could keep moving, ensuring children, the carriers of the future, had a chance to survive. Sacrifice was not about fairness. It was about the mathematics of life. How many could live, how many must be lost. And so, philosophy emerged not in words but in the calculus of survival. But even in such cold calculations, meaning had to be found. Human beings are not creatures of numbers alone. We search for stories, symbols, explanations that can soothe our conscience. The philosophy of sacrifice thus grew in layers: practical necessity wrapped in ritual, ritual wrapped in myth, myth wrapped in memory. It was never only about leaving someone behind. It was about transforming the unbearable into something that felt bearable, something that could be lived with. For example, some tribes may have believed that those who stayed behind became protectors in the spirit world. Their death was not waste, but transformation, an exchange in which one life ended so that many others might continue. In this sense, sacrifice was not seen as cruelty, but as a passage into a different form of existence. By embedding the act in cosmology, tribes softened the harshness of the moment. Yet philosophy is never singular. In every group, there must have been dissent. Some would have seen sacrifice as betrayal. Others would have seen it as natural. This diversity of perspective shaped the evolution of human morality. For some, sacrifice became synonymous with strength, proof that the group could make hard decisions. For others, it became a shadow, a haunting reminder of what was lost. Together, these tensions carved the contours of what it means to be human, torn always between compassion and necessity. It is worth asking, why do humans, unlike most animals, struggle so much with sacrifice? Wolves will abandon a sick member of the pack without ceremony. Birds will leave behind the weakest chick. Nature is indifferent. But humans carry memory, imagination, and conscience. We do not merely see what happens, we relive it, we assign meaning to it, we question it. This is what gave rise to the philosophy of sacrifice. For us, it was never just an act. It was a moral and existential event. Over time, the philosophy evolved. As tribes grew larger, as resources sometimes became more abundant, the margin for compassion widened. Some groups could afford to care for the frail, and in doing so they discovered another truth: the weak could still give back. The elder too tired to walk could still pass on knowledge. The injured hunter could still carve tools. The grandmother left behind in one age might, in another, be carried and cherished because her stories bound the tribe together. Here, sacrifice was delayed or transformed as compassion expanded its role. And yet, scarcity always lurked. In times of famine, in winters of hunger, the philosophy of sacrifice returned. It was not a choice tribes wanted, but one they could not escape. Every time it resurfaced, it raised the same questions. What do we owe to each other? What is the boundary between love and survival? How far does compassion stretch before necessity cuts it short? These questions have never truly left us. Even today, though the context has changed, the philosophy of sacrifice echoes in our lives. Modern societies debate how many resources should go to the vulnerable, the elderly, the sick. During times of war or disaster, leaders decide who will be protected, who will be sent into danger. Hospitals facing shortages must sometimes choose which patients receive care. The ancient dilemma has not vanished, it has only shifted form. For the prehistoric tribe, however, these decisions were not abstract policies. They were lived in the raw immediacy of the wilderness. A single moment of sacrifice could mean the difference between life and death for dozens. And so, sacrifice became philosophy not because anyone wrote it down, but because everyone carried it in their bones. It was a philosophy carved into the human heart through repetition, through memory, through grief. At the deepest level, the philosophy of sacrifice teaches us about the fragility of moral absolutes. There was no eternal rule, always protect the weak, or always leave them behind. Instead, there was a shifting scale, balancing compassion against survival, love against hunger, safety against risk. What makes humanity unique is not that we sacrificed, many creatures do, but that we questioned it, mourned it, remembered it, and built stories to make sense of it. Perhaps this is why sacrifice holds such power in human imagination. In myths, in religions, in philosophies across the world, sacrifice recurs as a central theme. The gods demand offerings. Heroes give their lives for their people. Parents starve so their children might eat. Each of these stories echoes the ancient truth: survival often comes at a cost, and someone must bear it. The tribe that left behind its weakest was living out, in stark reality, the same theme that later became the heart of spiritual and cultural traditions. So when we look back on the prehistoric campfire, when we imagine the moment of leaving one behind, we are not only witnessing an act of survival. We are witnessing the birth of one of humanity's deepest philosophical struggles: how to reconcile the individual with the collective, how to carry both compassion and necessity, how to find meaning in loss. The philosophy of sacrifice, then, is not a closed chapter of the past. It is an ongoing question, echoing still in the choices we make, the stories we tell, and the values we carry forward. The prehistoric tribe did not invent it, they simply lived it first, in its rawest form. And through their choices, they handed us a question we have never stopped asking: what is a life worth? And when must it be given up for the sake of others? There are few places where the human spirit is tested more harshly than in the tension between mercy and survival. It is a battlefield not fought with spears or stones, but within the human heart. To care for the vulnerable, the fragile, and the weak is one of our species' most defining qualities. Yet to protect the group, to safeguard the many, sometimes meant denying that care. In this collision between empathy and necessity, entire philosophies of existence were forged. Mercy is instinctive. When a child cries, the mother reaches out. When an elder struggles, hands are extended. Compassion binds the tribe, stitching individuals into something greater than themselves. But mercy is heavy. It demands food, time, energy. And in the unforgiving landscapes of prehistory, where the hunt could fail, where winters were merciless, where predators watched from the shadows, mercy could also endanger the very survival it sought to protect. Survival, on the other hand, is relentless. It demands speed, endurance, and efficiency. It leaves no space for hesitation. To survive, the group might have to travel faster than the slowest, to eat less so the youngest could live, to harden their hearts against cries they longed to answer. Survival pushes against mercy, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. This tension was not theoretical. It was lived, in footsteps on the snow, in fires built too small to warm everyone, in hunts where every piece of meat had to be divided with brutal calculation. Imagine the moment when a hunter returns with a single deer. The children's eyes widen with hunger, the elders' stomachs ache, and the injured man, too weak to hunt, waits silently for his share. Mercy whispers, feed them all. Survival growls, if we feed everyone, none of us will have strength for tomorrow. The division of meat becomes not only practical but moral, a line drawn between mercy and survival. Tribes therefore walked this line daily. Some leaned toward mercy, carrying their weak further than was practical, perhaps driven by love or by spiritual beliefs that every life had meaning. Others leaned toward survival, cutting ties swiftly when the cost grew too high, believing the future of the many mattered more than the life of one. Neither path was without pain. Mercy risked collective death. Survival risked moral fracture. Yet the most profound truth is this: humanity survived not by choosing one side, but by carrying both. Mercy kept us human. Survival kept us alive. Together, they formed a paradox that defined our evolution. If we had chosen only survival, we might have become as indifferent as the beasts of the wilderness, efficient but empty. If we had chosen only mercy, we might have perished under the weight of our compassion. It was the interplay, the constant negotiation, that allowed us to endure and to become what we are. This balance also shaped the emotional lives of those prehistoric people. Acts of mercy created bonds that carried the tribe through hardship. the mother who fed another's child, the young hunter who carried his wounded friend. These gestures built trust, gratitude, and solidarity. But acts of survival, harsh though they were, reminded the group that existence was fragile, that choices carried weight, that every step forward was bought at a cost. The tension itself made life meaningful. Mercy and survival also produced rituals. In some tribes, when someone was left behind, the act was softened by ceremony. Words were spoken, songs were sung, offerings were made. This was mercy woven into survival, a way to ease the pain of what had to be done. In other tribes, stories were told of ancestors watching from the skies, so that those left behind were never truly abandoned. This spiritual framing allowed mercy to remain present even in the shadow of necessity. The dilemma also played out across generations. Elders, knowing they slowed the group, might insist on being left, choosing survival of the tribe over their own life. Parents, by contrast, often embodied the opposite, sacrificing themselves so their children might live, embodying mercy even to their last breath. The young and the old often bore these choices differently, reflecting the natural rhythm of life. Those who had already lived gave way, while those who still had a future were protected. Modern life still echoes this prehistoric struggle. We face it in hospitals when resources are scarce. We face it in refugee crises when nations decide how much compassion they can afford. We face it in disasters when choices must be made about who to save first. Even though we live in cities with technology and abundance, the primal tension remains. How far can mercy stretch before survival demands a limit? Philosophers, theologians, and storytellers have all wrestled with this balance. Mercy without survival is unsustainable. Survival without mercy is inhuman. Somewhere between the two lies the essence of what it means to be human. It is not about solving the paradox, but about carrying it, living with the contradiction, making choices in the gray space between extremes. In prehistoric times, that meant deciding when to feed one more mouth, or when to let go. Today, it means balancing compassion with practicality in societies of millions. The scale has changed, but the heart of the question has not. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: mercy and survival are not enemies, but companions. They walk together, pulling us in different directions, forcing us to make choices that shape who we are. Without survival, mercy dies. Without mercy, survival loses its meaning. And so humanity endures, not by escaping the tension, but by embracing it again and again, across generations, across landscapes, across time. When we imagine the prehistoric tribe leaving their weakest behind, we are not simply witnessing cruelty or necessity. We are seeing the human condition in its rawest form. We are seeing mercy and survival locked in their eternal dance, each shaping the other, each ensuring that we are not only alive, but also human. Long after footsteps faded from the snow, long after fires burned down to ash, the choices made by prehistoric tribes did not vanish. They lingered, they echoed, they lived on in stories, in whispers, in the shared memory of a people struggling to understand their place in a brutal yet beautiful world. In this way, the hardest decisions, the leaving behind of the weak, the sacrifices of the strong, the tension between mercy and survival, did not remain isolated events. They became myth. They became memory. And through myth, they endured across generations. Human beings are storytellers. Even before writing, before symbols carved into stone, there were stories told by firelight. These stories carried knowledge, warnings, and meaning. They explained not only the world outside, the stars, the rivers, the beasts, but also the world inside, our choices, our grief, our compassion, and our cruelty. When a tribe left one of its members behind, the act was not simply forgotten. It was folded into the collective memory and often reshaped into narrative, into legend. Consider how a tribe might remember an elder who chose to stay behind so that the group could survive. In the moment, it was a painful loss. But in memory, that elder could become more than a victim of necessity. They could become a figure of honor. Around the fire, people might say, "He gave his strength back to the earth so that we might live. He walks with the spirits now." What began as tragedy became a story of sacrifice. In this way, grief was transformed into meaning, and memory became myth. Other times, the leaving behind of the weak might be remembered with fear, even guilt. Children might grow up hearing tales of restless spirits, the abandoned souls who wandered the cold plains or dark forests, angry at being left. Such myths carried warnings: if you do not care for your kin, they may return to haunt you. Here, memory became a moral guide, shaping future choices even if practical necessity sometimes overruled it. Across many ancient cultures, echoes of these stories still survive. Myths of heroic self-sacrifice, of journeys where the weakest must be left behind, of spirits who linger when compassion fails. These threads appear again and again. Whether in the Arctic, where Inuit elders were said to walk into the snow to ease the burden on their families, or in the ancient epics where heroes give their lives for companions, the themes are strikingly similar. What happened in the deep past did not vanish, it seeped into the myths that later peoples told. This is the power of memory, it reshapes reality into something that lasts. A tribe may have forgotten the details of a single harsh winter, but the story of a grandmother who sacrificed herself, or of a hunter abandoned on a mountain, could endure for centuries. Such tales became more than memories, they became templates for behavior, teaching each new generation about the values of their people. At times, these myths softened the cruelty of reality. Instead of remembering abandonment as pure loss, tribes might frame it as transformation. The one left behind did not simply die, they became part of the land, the wind, the river. Their spirit lingered as protection. By telling the story this way, survivors could carry less guilt, and the memory of the act could be woven into the sacred fabric of their worldview. But myths also warned against callousness. In some traditions, stories told of those who abandoned their kin too quickly or too cruelly. These figures often suffered divine punishment, or their descendants were cursed. Such tales reinforced the idea that while survival was necessary, mercy could never be entirely abandoned. To forget compassion was to lose one's humanity, and perhaps to invite the wrath of the unseen forces that governed the world. Memory also worked through ritual. Songs, chants, or ceremonies allowed tribes to remember not only their dead but the circumstances of their passing. A burial site might be visited with reverence, a cairn of stones built to mark where someone was left. These physical acts of memory turned a painful choice into something that could be honored. A pile of stones on the tundra or a carved mark on a cave wall was not only a reminder of a person but of the balance the tribe constantly navigated. And as time passed, the distinction between fact and myth blurred. Did a tribe truly leave an elder behind, or was it only a story told to explain why compassion and sacrifice mattered? Did a ghost truly wander the night, or was it guilt given shape? In the world of oral tradition, memory was never static. It grew, shifted, and evolved. What mattered was not strict accuracy but meaning, the lesson each story carried forward. This is why myths are often contradictory. Some speak of noble sacrifice, others of bitter abandonment. Some comfort, others warn. They reflect the different ways humans try to cope with the same tension, mercy and survival, compassion and necessity. Through myth, the tribe could rehearse these dilemmas again and again, preparing themselves emotionally for the next time such a choice might be forced upon them. Even in the modern world, echoes of these prehistoric memories still linger. Folktales, religious parables, and even literature often circle back to the same themes. A character lays down their life for others, a group must abandon someone to continue the journey, a spirit returns to demand justice for cruelty. These are not simply inventions of later cultures. They are echoes, deep, resonant echoes, of the choices our ancestors made tens of thousands of years ago. To understand myth, then, is to understand memory. And to understand memory is to glimpse how prehistoric people processed the hardest truths of their existence. They could not change the fact that survival sometimes demanded cruelty, but they could change how they remembered it. They could transform necessity into honor, guilt into caution, grief into reverence. And in this way, memory became a bridge between the harshness of reality and the hope of meaning. Myths gave shape to pain. They offered comfort, warning, inspiration. And above all, they ensured that the tribe's story did not end with loss, but carried forward generation after generation, echoing in fireside tales, in chants, in the very identity of a people. When we speak of prehistoric myths today, we are not only studying culture, we are hearing the voices of those who lived through choices no human should ever have to make. Their echoes remain in us, whispering that while survival kept us alive, memory kept us human. When we imagine prehistory, we often picture wide landscapes, silent migrations, and fire-lit nights. But how do we know any of it? How can we, living tens of thousands of years later, hope to reconstruct the choices of a tribe, choices as intimate and painful as leaving behind one of their own? This is where the archaeologist enters the story. Theirs is the delicate art of piecing together fragments, of turning bones, tools, and soil into whispers of human lives. It is not a science of certainties but of puzzles, of patient assembly, where each shard, each clue, must be fitted into a bigger picture. The archaeologist's puzzle begins in the ground, a scatter of bones on a cave floor, a burial site cut into frozen earth, a hearth filled with the charred remains of plants and animals. These fragments might seem silent, but in skilled hands they begin to speak. The position of bones tells of ritual, accident, or deliberate placement. The layers of soil reveal the sequence of events, which fires burned first, which tools were dropped, which winters passed between one life and another. And sometimes, archaeologists find something more unsettling, evidence of abandonment. A skeleton left alone in a cave with no burial goods, no signs of ritual. A child's bones far from any settlement, as if left behind. An elder's remains positioned where the living once camped but later moved on. To the untrained eye, these are just bones. To the archaeologist, they are questions. Why here? Why alone? Was this person too weak to continue? Did the tribe mark their passing, or simply keep walking? Of course, certainty is rare. The evidence is fragmentary, easily disturbed by time, animals, and the shifting earth. Archaeologists are cautious. They rarely say this is what happened. Instead, they offer probabilities, interpretations, competing theories. One archaeologist may see deliberate abandonment, another may see accidental death. But even in this uncertainty, there is power. The puzzle forces us to confront possibilities, and through them, we glimpse the hard truths of survival. Consider, for example, the Upper Paleolithic burials found in caves across Europe. Some individuals were carefully interred, their bodies adorned with beads, ochre, and tools. Others were left unadorned, sometimes even left exposed. The difference speaks volumes. Why were some honored while others were not? Was it status? Was it strength? Or was it the desperate calculus of survival, that not everyone could be carried forward? The bones do not answer, but they whisper enough for us to imagine. The archaeologist's puzzle is not only about bones but about absences. A settlement site might show traces of 20 hearths one year and only 15 the next. Where did those missing people go? Did they starve? Did they leave? Or were they left behind? Archaeology is as much about what is missing as what remains. Silence can be as revealing as sound. Modern tools deepen the puzzle. Radiocarbon dating tells us how long ago a life ended. DNA analysis shows kinship, who was related to whom might have been cared for, who might have been cast aside. Isotopic analysis reveals diet, migration, stress in the body. A skeleton with worn-down joints and missing teeth might reveal an elder who lived long beyond usefulness, perhaps because they were cherished, or perhaps because they were carried until the burden grew too heavy. A child with malnutrition marks tells of scarcity, of choices forced upon the tribe. Piece by piece, these clues bring us closer to understanding not only how prehistoric people lived but how they decided. Yet the puzzle is not only scientific, it is also deeply human. Archaeologists are not detached machines, they bring their own empathy, their own imagination to the work. To kneel in the dirt beside the bones of someone left behind is to feel a weight across time. It is to wonder what their last moments were like. Did they know they were being abandoned? Did they accept it as necessary? Did they rage against it? Archaeologists may not answer these questions, but they feel them. And through their careful reconstructions, they pass those questions to us. There is also the danger of projection. We modern humans see cruelty where prehistoric people may have seen necessity. We see abandonment where they may have seen a gift, an elder offering themselves so the tribe could move on. The archaeologist's puzzle is as much about confronting our own assumptions as it is about deciphering the past. Every interpretation reveals not only prehistory but also how we today understand compassion, survival, and humanity. Sometimes the puzzle comes together more clearly. In certain Arctic and Siberian contexts, ethnographic records describe elders choosing to remain behind during migration. When archaeologists then find skeletal remains in isolated locations, the puzzle pieces align, memory, story, and material evidence converge. In those moments, the prehistoric world feels closer, as if the voices of the past and the science of the present briefly overlap. But most of the time, the puzzle remains incomplete. For every bone uncovered, countless others have dissolved. For every site discovered, countless more lie buried, unreachable, perhaps forever lost. Archaeology is a humbling science. It reminds us of the enormity of what we do not know. The puzzle can never be fully solved, but each fragment matters. Each bone, each hearth, each tool adds one more stroke to the faint painting of our origins. And so the archaeologist bends over their trench, brush in hand, piecing together lives that ended tens of thousands of years ago. They are detectives, yes, but also translators, giving voice to those who can no longer speak. Their puzzle is not only about the past. It is about us, about whether we will remember, whether we will listen, and whether we can face the choices our ancestors were forced to make. Through their work, we come closer to understanding the truth, that survival was never simple, that compassion and cruelty were entangled, and that even in bones and soil, the echoes of human choice still remain. When we step into the world of prehistory, we cannot help but carry our modern sense of morality with us. We are children of societies that prize compassion, that exalt care for the vulnerable, that often measure our humanity by how we treat those who cannot contribute. But here lies a dangerous trap, the temptation to judge the choices of prehistoric tribes by standards that did not yet exist. What does morality mean when survival is not secure, when every dawn is a question mark, when each winter threatens to erase an entire community? To understand the morality of leaving the weakest behind, we must first ask a more fundamental question. Did morality as we understand it even exist tens of thousands of years ago? For many philosophers and anthropologists, morality is not a timeless law handed down from above but a survival tool forged in the crucible of necessity. Early human morality, they argue, was born from the pressures of life and death. Sharing food was not a virtue, it was a necessity, for one day the giver would need help in return. Protecting children was not an act of kindness, it was an instinct to preserve the tribe's future. Mourning the dead was not simply sentiment, it bound the living together, reminding them of their shared fate. But in such a world, morality was flexible. It bent under the weight of circumstance. To care for the weak when food was plentiful might be noble. To do so in a season of famine might mean risking everyone. To leave an elder behind in harsh terrain might appear cruel to us, but to those who made the choice, it could have been the only way to save the young. What we call morality was not a set of absolutes but a shifting balance, a negotiation between survival and compassion. This raises a troubling possibility. Perhaps our ancestors did not see their actions as cruel at all. Perhaps they saw them as necessary, even honorable. In some traditions, elders who chose to remain behind were remembered with respect, not pity. Their sacrifice was woven into the story of the group's survival, their absence becoming a silent gift to those who continued walking. What to us looks like abandonment may, to them, have been a final act of responsibility. Yet the question lingers, was there regret? Did those who left someone behind carry guilt, or did they sleep soundly knowing they had done what was required? Archaeology cannot answer this. Bones do not preserve emotions. Hearths cannot tell us of tears shed in the dark. And so we are left to imagine. Some scholars argue that morality as we know it emerged gradually with the growth of larger societies. In small, mobile bands of hunters and gatherers, the rules were intimate, shaped by immediate needs. As groups grew, as settlements became permanent, as food could be stored and shared more reliably, a new kind of morality began to bloom, one that allowed for sustained compassion even at a cost. Perhaps then, the abandonment of the weak in early prehistory was not a failure of morality but simply the reality of a world not yet rich enough to sustain the ideals we cherish today. And yet, counter-evidence complicates the story. Archaeologists have found skeletons of individuals who lived long with severe injuries or disabilities, spines twisted, limbs missing, teeth worn away. These people could not have survived alone. They must have been fed, protected, carried. Here we glimpse another side of prehistoric morality, one where care was given even when it demanded sacrifice. These discoveries remind us that compassion, too, is ancient, that leaving someone behind was not the only choice, nor always the chosen one. Humanity has always carried both possibilities. This duality, abandonment and care, forces us to confront a deeper truth. Morality is not fixed, not absolute, but context-bound. The same tribe that might leave behind a weak member in the midst of famine could, in times of abundance, nurture them with tenderness. What we call morality was, in prehistory, a spectrum of responses to changing circumstances. So where does that leave us today, looking back? Should we condemn the tribe who walked away from their weakest? Or should we understand them as doing the only thing they could? Perhaps both. Perhaps to judge them is to misunderstand the crushing pressures they faced. But perhaps to excuse them entirely is to erase the ache of those who were left behind. There is also the uncomfortable mirror held up to us. We live in societies of plenty, yet even now we abandon people, through neglect, poverty, exclusion. We may not leave them behind on a mountain path, but we leave them behind in hospital corridors, in forgotten villages, in the margins of our cities. Is our morality so different, or merely dressed in finer clothes? Prehistory then becomes a lens not only into the past but into ourselves, the roots of compassion, the limits of survival, and the choices we still make when resources feel scarce. Do we stretch ourselves to care for all, or do we draw lines? Do we define humanity by its tenderness, or by its pragmatism? In the end, the morality of leaving someone behind may never be fully resolved. To the tribe, it was survival. To the one left behind, it was abandonment. To us, it is a haunting paradox, both understandable and unbearable. Prehistory does not give us answers. It gives us questions, questions that echo into our own lives. And perhaps that is the point. To wrestle with these questions is to walk alongside our ancestors, to feel the weight they carried, to recognize that morality is not a fixed inheritance but a story we continue to write, a story that began in firelit nights and snowy landscapes, in the footsteps of tribes who had to choose. Morality, then, is not a distant law but a fragile thread, sometimes stretched to breaking, sometimes woven stronger through compassion. And if we listen carefully, the prehistoric past whispers to us still, what would you have done, if you were there? When a tribe left their weakest behind, the moment did not vanish into silence. It lingered, in memory, in whispers around the fire, in the quiet weight of stories. Prehistoric people did not have written language, but they carried something just as enduring, oral tradition. Through stories, they preserved lessons, encoded values, and passed on the emotional gravity of choices made. In this way, even abandonment could become part of collective identity. Imagine the scene, a group gathered around a fire, embers glowing against the cold. The children lean in, eyes wide, as an elder speaks. The tale might not recount exact names, exact places, those details fade with time, but the essence remains, a story of survival, of a journey where someone was left behind so the many could endure. The voice of the storyteller gives meaning to what might otherwise seem unbearable. The abandonment is reframed, not as cruelty, but as sacrifice, not as despair, but as resilience. Stories did more than record events, they shaped them. They softened the raw edges of trauma, transforming memory into myth. To remember without storytelling would be to carry unbearable grief. But to weave the same event into a tale gave it purpose. A grandmother left behind on the mountain could become remembered as a guardian spirit who watched over the tribe from the snow. A sick child who could not continue might become a symbol of purity, their spirit guiding hunters toward prey. By transfiguring loss into story, prehistoric people found a way to live with what survival demanded. And so the past was never static. Each retelling reshaped it, polished it, gave it new layers. Anthropologists studying oral societies today note that stories often blend fact and metaphor, practical lessons, and spiritual meaning. A warning about famine might be hidden inside a tale of a spirit who withholds food until generosity is shown. A memory of leaving someone behind might be retold as a lesson in endurance, teaching children that life asks hard choices. But stories could also serve as cautions. Not all tales justified abandonment. Some warned against forgetting the weak, painting neglect as a danger that might anger spirits or fracture the tribe's unity. A hunter who ignored his injured brother might be punished in the afterlife. A group that abandoned too many might face bad luck, storms, or the wrath of unseen forces. In this way, stories preserved the tension we've seen throughout prehistory, the balance between compassion and survival. Oral tradition kept both possibilities alive, the acceptance of sacrifice and the insistence on care. We can glimpse the remnants of these prehistoric stories in later myths and folklore. Across the world, legends of self-sacrifice echo, the old person who stays behind so the younger may live, the hero who gives up their place on the raft, the god who dies so the people might be fed. These motifs may trace their roots to countless prehistoric nights when tribes grappled with the unbearable weight of leaving someone behind. Over millennia, those lived experiences hardened into archetypes, shaping the moral and spiritual frameworks of later cultures. Take, for instance, the recurring figure of the wise elder who chooses death so that the group may live. In Japan, the folktale of Ubasut tells of elderly women carried to the mountains to die when food grew scarce. In Norse sagas, warriors sought glorious death to preserve the strength of the tribe. Among indigenous groups, stories describe ancestors who walked into the snow when their time had come. Different geographies, different languages, but the same haunting theme: survival bound to sacrifice, abandonment intertwined with meaning. For prehistoric tribes, stories like these were not simply entertainment. They were survival guides, ethical compasses, and repositories of memory. When a child asked, "Why did we leave her behind?" the answer was not merely practical. It was storied. It carried echoes of past generations who had faced the same choice. Storytelling anchored the tribe in continuity, assuring them that their pain was not unique but part of a larger human rhythm. We should also remember that oral traditions were not static archives but living, breathing performances. Storytellers adapted their tales to the needs of the moment. In a time of plenty, a story might emphasize compassion, urging the group to care for the frail. In a time of scarcity, the same story might be told with different emphasis, highlighting sacrifice and endurance. The truth of the tale shifted with context, just as morality itself shifted under the pressure of survival. This adaptability gave oral tradition its power. It allowed a tribe to keep multiple truths alive, to hold abandonment and compassion in tension without needing a fixed resolution. The stories did not dictate one path. They offered frameworks, metaphors, mirrors. They gave listeners the tools to interpret their own choices. But what about the ones left behind? Were their voices ever preserved? Did they get to tell their side of the story before silence claimed them? Perhaps, in some cases, yes. An elder might speak words of farewell, words later remembered and retold. A mother might give her child a final blessing, woven into the tribe's collective memory. If so, those words became part of the narrative, ensuring that even in absence, their voice lived on. Archaeology cannot uncover the spoken stories of prehistory. Yet through the universality of certain myths, through the echoes that stretch across cultures, we can be almost certain that they existed. The repetition of motifs, sacrifice, abandonment, transformation, suggests that humanity has long needed stories to make sense of survival's cruelty. And there is something profoundly moving in this. The fact that we still tell such stories today, thousands of years later, reveals their power. They remind us that storytelling was humanity's first technology for meaning-making, older even than agriculture or writing. It was the bridge that allowed our ancestors to endure not just physically but emotionally, carrying unbearable memories in forms that could be shared, reinterpreted, and passed down. So when a tribe left their weakest behind, it was never only a physical act. It was also the beginning of a story told and retold, shaped and reshaped, becoming part of the fabric of human culture. A story that whispers through myths we still tell in books, in films, in lullabies. A story that binds us across millennia to those firelit nights when our ancestors wrestled with impossible choices and turned them into words. In the end, perhaps this is the true legacy of abandonment, not only the footprints left in the snow, but the stories carried forward. Stories that remind us of survival's cost, of sacrifice's weight, of the fragile line between compassion and necessity. Stories that still live within us, asking, how will we tell our own story when our time comes? The choices of prehistoric tribes may seem distant, frozen in snow and stone, but their echoes reach us even today. Modern life is far removed from the relentless struggle against predators, famine, and winter, yet the tension between survival and compassion persists. Societies, like tribes, still face questions about whom to care for and whom to leave behind. The stage has changed, but the drama remains the same. Consider hospitals, where resources are finite and decisions must be made about who receives life-saving treatment first. A patient may wait, another may receive priority. The stakes are immense, and the choices agonizing. Here, as in prehistory, mercy and survival collide. Modern medicine allows us to save many lives, but it cannot save all. Doctors and nurses confront the echoes of that ancient dilemma with every critical case, navigating ethical terrain that prehistoric tribes faced instinctively. Similarly, during disasters, earthquakes, floods, wildfires, societies are forced to triage, to prioritize certain lives over others. Emergency responders must decide whom to rescue first, where to send supplies, which communities will receive aid. The choices are not made lightly, and yet the same haunting calculus appears: the weak, the vulnerable, the slow, the sick. Sometimes they cannot be reached in time. Abandonment, in subtle or overt forms, still exists in the modern world, echoing the raw decisions made thousands of years ago on frozen plains and treacherous mountains. Even outside crises, modern systems can mirror prehistoric abandonment in quieter ways. Poverty, neglect, and social exclusion create situations where the most vulnerable are effectively left behind. In cities and nations, those without access to education, healthcare, or opportunity may face isolation and hardship. They are not physically abandoned on a mountain path, but society's indifference leaves them behind in an equally profound sense. The moral tension persists: how much can, or should, a society care, and at what cost to itself? Economic choices, too, reflect this paradox. Governments and corporations must allocate resources, often choosing efficiency over universal care. The weak or marginalized sometimes pay the price of progress or growth. The calculus is not of cruelty but of pragmatism, an echo of the survival instinct that drove prehistoric tribes to make impossible choices. Even when abundance exists, scarcity in other forms, attention, opportunity, time, forces decisions that mirror ancient dilemmas. And yet, unlike prehistory, we now have the capacity to reflect, debate, and intervene. Our societies create ethical frameworks, laws, and policies designed to protect the vulnerable. Welfare programs, public health initiatives, and human rights protections are modern expressions of compassion, of collective mercy stretched across populations. They are attempts to balance survival, of the social, economic, and political organism, with care for those who might otherwise be left behind. In this, we see the evolution of morality from instinct to philosophy, from survival-driven necessity to conscious ethical choice. Still, the echoes remind us that the tension never disappears. Even in the most equitable societies, hard choices remain. Medical rationing, refugee crises, famine relief, disaster response, all are modern instances of the prehistoric struggle to weigh one life against another. What we call ethics, legislation, or policy is, in essence, a socially mediated continuation of the calculus that guided tribes across the wilderness. The instruments have changed, laws, technology, institutions, but the core question persists. How do we balance the needs of the many with the rights of the few, the weak, or the vulnerable? The echoes also appear in subtle psychological ways. Parents make decisions about which risks to take for their children, managers weigh the welfare of some employees over others, communities debate priorities in allocation of time and effort. Every day, we negotiate small versions of the same moral dilemma: survival versus mercy, efficiency versus compassion, pragmatism versus empathy. These modern echoes show that the past is never really past, it lives within us, shaping our decisions and reflections. Art, literature, and film also preserve these echoes. Stories of sacrifice, abandonment, and moral compromise resonate because they tap into an ancient human experience. A character stranded in a disaster, a hero leaving a companion to save the many, a society forced to choose whom to protect. These narratives speak to instincts and dilemmas that predate writing, cities, and civilization. Through storytelling, we continue to process and reflect upon the same questions that prehistoric humans faced, connecting us to our distant ancestors through shared moral experience. Even technology is not immune. Algorithms, artificial intelligence, and resource allocation software sometimes make decisions that prioritize certain outcomes over others. In abstract form, we are still negotiating the same ancient questions: who will be saved, who will benefit, who might be left behind when choices are necessary. The scale is different, but the essence remains the same. And so the echoes of prehistory are everywhere, in the tangible, in the intangible, in the moral and practical fabric of modern life. They remind us that the human struggle has always been twofold: to endure physically and to endure ethically. Survival and compassion are not merely historical concerns, they are enduring aspects of what it means to be human. By reflecting on these echoes, we gain perspective. Prehistoric tribes were not cruel, nor were they uniquely harsh. They were humans making the only choices available to them under extreme conditions. Their stories, preserved in myth, memory, and archaeology, offer lessons not only about resilience but also about moral complexity. And as we confront the modern world, we are tasked with listening to those echoes, to understanding that every choice we make continues the dialogue started tens of thousands of years ago on snow-covered plains and sun-scorched trails. In the end, the echoes in modern times are both warning and inspiration. They caution us about neglect, about abandoning those who rely on us. They inspire us to stretch compassion, to invent systems that allow care without threatening survival, to balance mercy with pragmatism. They remind us that we are heirs to the same dilemmas, that the past is never truly gone, and that understanding our prehistoric ancestors is essential to understanding ourselves. As the day fades and the embers of the fire glow, we find ourselves in a moment of stillness, gazing backward across tens of thousands of years. The story of a tribe leaving their weakest behind is not just a tale of survival, it is a mirror reflecting the choices, fears, and compassion that define humanity itself. In the quiet, we begin to see the threads that connect us to our ancestors: the struggle to endure, the wrestle with morality, the creation of memory, and the crafting of stories that give meaning to life and death. Firelight has always been a place of reflection. For prehistoric humans, it offered warmth, safety, and a canvas upon which to project fears and hopes. Around its glow, they told stories, debated choices, and passed on knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death. Today, as we sit metaphorically beneath the same glow, we retrace their steps, considering the decisions made in desperation, the acts of sacrifice, and the weight of those who were left behind. Firelight illuminates not only the landscape of the past but the terrain of the human soul. In this reflective space, we confront the paradox that has woven through the narrative of the documentary. Survival often demanded acts that modern sensibilities deem cruel, yet those same acts were embedded with meaning, necessity, and even honor. Leaving a child or elder behind was not always an ethical failure, it was a response to circumstance, a calculus of life and death. Yet we do not shy away from empathy. We imagine the fear, the grief, the trembling hands, and heavy hearts of those forced to choose. In doing so, we acknowledge that humanity has always lived in tension between survival and compassion, instinct and conscience. Reflection under the firelight also allows us to see the transformative power of memory. The tribe's choices, the harsh winters, the journeys across unforgiving terrain, none of these moments were truly lost. They were carried forward in stories, rituals, and myths that preserved both grief and meaning. Memory, shaped by narrative, allowed prehistory to endure beyond immediate survival. It was through these stories that the weak were remembered, the sacrifices honored, and the lessons transmitted. In this sense, firelight is a metaphor for memory itself, fleeting, warm, illuminating, yet capable of casting long shadows that shape understanding across generations. Philosophically, this reflection forces us to examine our own morality. We look back and ask, would we have made the same choices? Could we have walked away knowing it was necessary, and carried the weight of that decision? Would we have found ways to preserve life wherever possible, even at great cost? These questions are not hypothetical exercises, they are echoes of the dilemmas that prehistoric humans faced, reminding us that the essence of morality is context, courage, and reflection. The cinematic rhythm of firelight also invites us to dwell in wonder. We are struck by the fragility of life, the vastness of the world our ancestors inhabited, and the sheer resilience required to navigate it. They faced winters without shelter, predators without weapons, scarcity without safety nets. And yet they persisted, innovated, and loved. Their stories, preserved in bones, artifacts, and oral traditions, testify to both vulnerability and strength. They are a testament to the enduring human spirit, flickering like flames against the dark canvas of prehistory. As we linger in this contemplative space, we recognize that the documentary's journey has been as much about self-discovery as it has been about history. Tracing the echoes of abandonment, sacrifice, memory, and morality allows us to see ourselves in the narrative. Our empathy, judgment, curiosity, and imagination are all bridges connecting present to past. We begin to appreciate that prehistory is not a distant, alien world. It is a continuum in which our own humanity was born, tested, and refined. The firelight also reminds us of interconnectedness. Each individual survival mattered to the group, and each act, whether of care or necessity, resonated beyond the immediate moment. Leaving one behind could determine the fate of many, preserving one could inspire loyalty, gratitude, and myth. In this web of interdependence, actions acquire meaning beyond their immediate consequences. The fire illuminates the intricate lattice of relationships, choices, and consequences that define all human life, past and present. And finally, firelight embodies reflection. It asks us to pause, to witness, and to learn. The story of the tribe leaving their weakest behind is not merely about cruelty or survival. It is about awareness. Awareness of consequences, of ethical weight, of the fragility and resilience of life. Reflection is not passive, it shapes how we carry ourselves forward. By engaging with prehistory, by imagining the cold nights and impossible decisions, we cultivate empathy, judgment, and wisdom that inform our own lives. The cinematic conclusion under firelight invites one last meditation. Life is finite, choices are heavy, and yet meaning can be found even in loss. The tribe's story ends not in despair but in continuity, through memory, myth, and the echoes that ripple across generations. The fire may die, the embers fade, yet the warmth remains. In witnessing their struggles, sacrifices, and stories, we carry a spark forward, an ember of understanding, reflection, and humanity itself. So, as the flames die down and the night deepens, we are left with quiet awe. Awe at survival against impossible odds. Awe at the moral complexity that predated codified ethics. Awe at the power of memory and story to preserve meaning. And above all, awe at the continuity of human experience, stretching from the snow-covered plains of prehistory to the fire-lit reflections of today. The fire may dim, but the reflection endures. And in that reflection, we find ourselves connected, to the tribe, to the past, and to the eternal human journey of navigating life, loss, and the delicate balance of morality and survival. As the final embers of the fire die and the night stretches into silence, we find ourselves standing at the edge of understanding. The story of a tribe leaving their weakest behind has carried us across millennia, through snow-laden landscapes, sun-scorched plains, and the intimate glow of hearth fires. It has been a journey into survival, morality, memory, and story, a journey that begins in prehistory and continues within each of us today. In this quiet moment, the narrative crystallizes into reflection. What does it mean to be human, to make choices under pressure, and to leave a mark that echoes beyond one's own life? The human continuum is revealed most clearly when we step back and view time not as a series of isolated events but as an unbroken thread. The tribe faced impossible choices, we face our own, though clothed in different circumstances. The firelight of prehistory still flickers in our decisions, in how we care for the vulnerable, in how we weigh survival against compassion, efficiency against empathy. These are not new dilemmas. They are ancient, recurring, and persistent. To understand the tribe is to understand ourselves, and to understand ourselves is to see the past reflected in the present. Throughout this documentary, we have explored the multiplicity of human experience. We have seen the raw necessity that sometimes demanded abandonment, and we have seen the enduring capacity for care and sacrifice. We have traced the bones of the past, listened to the silent stories in hearths and burial sites, and followed the arc of memory as it became myth. Each piece has contributed to a mosaic that is neither simple nor absolute. Humanity has always been complicated, full of paradoxes, and this complexity is precisely what links us to those who came before. Memory, perhaps, is the thread that binds the continuum most tightly. The tribe's choices were preserved not only in physical evidence but in story, ritual, and cultural practice. Oral traditions ensured that lessons survived the erosion of time, the weight of survival, the responsibilities of community, and the significance of individual lives. Today we continue that practice, remembering not just history but the ethical questions embedded within it. We read, we reflect, we pass on stories, and in doing so we sustain the continuum. Morality, too, flows along this continuum. Prehistoric decisions may challenge our modern sensibilities, yet they also illuminate the deep roots of ethical thought. Morality emerges not from abstract rules alone but from the lived experience of choice, necessity, and reflection. The dilemmas faced by the tribe, when to preserve, when to release, when to endure, echo in contemporary ethics, in debates over care, justice, and responsibility. We are heirs to a long history of moral negotiation, stretching from firelit nights to the corridors of modern institutions, from intimate decisions to societal policies. Reflection under the firelight and across the continuum also teaches humility. We are reminded that survival was never guaranteed, that human life has always been precarious, and that the boundaries between right and wrong are often blurred by circumstance. To judge the tribe harshly is to ignore the pressures of their reality. To excuse them without thought is to dismiss the pain and moral weight they endured. The continuum asks us to hold both perspectives, to recognize complexity, and to allow empathy to coexist with understanding. The human continuum is also a continuum of connection. Every decision, every story, every act of care or sacrifice resonates forward. The bones left behind, the tales passed down, the myths woven from real experience, all these threads intertwine, linking generations across time. When we reflect upon prehistory, we are participating in this continuum. We are listening to echoes, adding our own reflections, and ensuring that the story of humanity is not confined to the past but lives actively in our understanding and action. Even in modernity, the lessons of prehistory are tangible. The struggles of the past remind us that choices about care, resource allocation, and responsibility are timeless. They urge us to consider how we treat the vulnerable, how we balance competing needs, and how we create systems of compassion that endure. Our hospitals, our social policies, our cultural narratives, all are ways in which we continue the dialogue begun tens of thousands of years ago. In honoring that continuum, we acknowledge the interdependence of human life across space and time. Storytelling remains central to this continuum. Just as oral traditions preserved lessons of sacrifice and abandonment, our narratives today, through literature, film, and history, keep the ethical, emotional, and philosophical weight of prehistory alive. We engage with these stories, interpret them, and allow them to shape our consciousness. They remind us that being human is not merely a matter of biology, but of reflection, choice, and the desire to make meaning from our experiences. Ultimately, the human continuum is a tapestry of resilience, memory, and morality. It is woven from moments of survival and moments of care, from grief and joy, from abandonment and sacrifice. Each thread matters, each decision ripples forward, each story endures. By tracing the life of a tribe that faced impossible choices, we recognize that humanity is defined not by perfection but by engagement with the moral and existential challenges of life. Our ancestors teach us that living ethically, thoughtfully, and compassionately is a lifelong process stretching across generations. As the fire fades completely, leaving only the quiet night, the reflection persists. We carry the knowledge that the past is not inert, that our ancestors' struggles resonate within us, and that our choices today are part of the same continuum. We are linked to those who walked snow-laden plains, who gazed across empty horizons, who left and who were left. Their courage, suffering, and ingenuity are embedded in the human story, guiding and shaping the choices we face now. The documentary concludes not with closure but with a sense of connection, a recognition that life, morality, and memory are threads in an unbroken line. The human continuum stretches back into prehistory and forward into the future, inviting each generation to reflect, to learn, and to act with awareness. The story of a tribe leaving their weakest behind is both a record and a question, a mirror and a lesson, a whisper from the past that reaches across millennia to touch us here and now. In this final reflection, we understand that the past lives in our choices, our stories, and our compassion. The continuum reminds us that humanity is a shared journey, one defined not only by survival but by the courage to reflect, the wisdom to care, and the persistence to remember. And so, as night deepens, we step forward carrying the legacy of countless generations, connected, aware, and ever mindful of the fragile, beautiful, and challenging continuum of human life.